For this discussion, we have three panelists with us. And the format for the panel very quickly is I'm going to give a short introduction to what the discussion will be for this panel, followed by inviting each of the speakers to make introductory remarks for about 5 or 7 minutes. And then I thought we could do a few rounds of questions from me to the panelists, followed by inviting questions from the audience. I think Swati will help me moderate the questions from the audience, and hopefully we'll have a good, interesting session. Just to introduce the discussion a little bit, as most of you probably already know, the Indian schooling system is the largest in the world. It is also one of the most variegated school systems in the world. If considered independently, India's government school system would be the second largest, and its private school system would be the third largest, following China. There is also a high variation within the schools. Government schools exist at different tiers of government, from municipal all the way to run by the central government. The private schools run the spectrum from, of course, low-fee private schools all the way to elite high-fee private schools. Schools offer education in different languages with different operating models. A bulk of India's school system schools follow state-prescribed syllabi and pedagogy. But at the far end of the spectrum, of course, there are experimental schools as well as parents trying homeschooling. Some of these offerings are emerging from regulatory requirements, others from demands of parents. But this system has struggled to ensure learning for children. In 2009, India participated in the PISA assessments by nominating two of our best performing states, Tamil Nadu and Himachal Pradesh. But we ranked 72nd among 74 participating countries. Our government's response was to beg out of PISA, citing issues with the measurement, than to reflect on the crisis. More generally, a civil society initiative to provide some data and to help us understand the learning progress of our children began with the annual Status of Education report, what we now know as the ASER report. In 2018, after I think about 12 odd years of tracking learning outcomes, only 45% of our grade 5 children could read a grade 2 text. This is an alarming statistic, a data point that has gotten largely worse over time. Meanwhile, the regulatory and policy framework has focused on inputs and on vilifying the private school sector. A CCS study in 2019 collated about 145 individual laws and 101 corresponding rules across all of India's states that regulate school education. On average, each state has about 4 different acts and 3 rules approximately. Uttar Pradesh has the highest number of laws with about 11. Karnataka has the highest number of rules at about 17. Of course, the primary union law that governs K-12 education is the Right to Education Act 2009. Ironically, the RTE was passed in the same year as India's dismal performance at PISA, and of course didn't really refer to learning outcomes in the law. The RTE Act is applicable to all private schools across the country. It deals with all aspects of school management: recognition, admission, capitation, physical punishment and harassment, infrastructure norms, hiring, appointment, management of teachers, and so on and so forth. In addition, and the subordinate legislative instruments, so everything from government orders, circulars, press releases, govern the process of how a school is started and how it runs over the course of its offerings to the public. Finally, of course, there are court judgments and RTE state rules that require schools in India to be not-for-profit or not commercial. From 2014, the government began to engage with experts to constitute a new national education policy. The last policy was put in place about 1986. In 2019, the Kasturi Rangan Committee submitted a 400-odd page draft that argued for a light but tight regulatory framework, and it recommended that the government review, Parliament and government review the regulatory provisions that curtailed school autonomy and innovations. In July 2020, the final policy was cleared by Cabinet, and on regulation, the final policy is largely in sync with the Kasturi Rangan Committee report. Of course, the timing couldn't have been worse. Since March 2020, India found herself in the eye of the COVID storm. One sector worst affected was school education. The harsh lockdown meant that schools were shut, children were restless and not learning, and parents were frustrated. It also meant that schools were unable to pay their staff or maintain their infrastructure. But they were also at the same time under immense pressure to forego fees. Many schools managed to pivot and offer online learning, but many also began to shut down because it was unfeasible to run a school without revenues. Which, of course, brings us to this conversation. COVID has forced us to re examine almost every part of our lives. It has also provided us an opportunity to rethink the regulatory framework for school education. What should the objectives of government be? How can we make it easier for schools to start up and offer quality learning services? How can we empower parents to support their aspirations for their children? And finally, how do we hold every player in the system to account? With this introduction, I want to introduce the panelists and invite them to make their opening remarks. We have three panelists with me today. The first is Anirudh Khaitan. Anirudh is the vice chairman of the board of the Khaitan Group and is the vice chairman of the Khaitan Public School. He's also a treasurer at FICCI Arise, which is a consortium of members, a collegium of members representing various facets of the education ecosystem that then champion quality education. He's an entrepreneurship professional with a double major in finance and entrepreneurship from Babson College. Anirudh, welcome to the discussion today.
Thank you.
We also have Dr. E. Prasad Rao, who's a quality advisor for the National Independent Schools Alliance and a founder of Paramita Schools. Dr. Rao is the chairman of the Paramita Group of Institutions, Iris World School, which is an ICSE school, and Explorica, which has Cambridge affiliation. He has been an academic advisor for the Telangana Recognized Schools Management Association, which has membership of about 1,000 schools. And of course, since 2019, he has been a quality advisor at NISA. Dr. Rao is always on a mission mode to offer the child its rightful place in learning through assessment, experimentation, understanding, and discovery. Welcome, Dr. Rao. I hope you are able to turn your camera on also, sir. Finally, we have Dr. Parth Shah, who is the president and founder of Center for Civil Society. Parth is also the brains behind the School Choice National Conference, which is one of the longest running school education conferences in India. He's the director of the Indian School of Public Policy. Dr. Shah's research and advocacy work focus on economic freedom, so law, liberty, and livelihood campaign, choice and competition in education, the slogan for which is fund students, not schools, the property rights approach for the environment, terracotta vision of stewardship, and good governance. He has edited and published extensively in international and Indian journals on various issues from currency regulation to education policy. Parth holds a degree in a PhD in economics from Auburn University and has taught at the University of Michigan. Welcome, Parth. I hope I am audible to all of the panelists. Yeah, great. Anirudh, let's begin, perhaps you can introduce the session with some remarks from your end for about 5 to 7 minutes, if that's feasible.
Sure. Thank you, Bhuvana. I'll try to keep to the timing. So good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for having me on this panel. I really enjoyed Geeta's talk. She's always so comprehensive on her research that, you can't really add much more to it. So I'm not going to repeat what she said, but I'm going to kind of give you a short thoughts of mine on the NEP. India is a very complex country, right? We have hundreds of languages. Every state can monitor, it's education is a co-current subject. This center doesn't really have control over how education policy runs in every state. So NEP is just kind of a guiding document. It's not really a policy, right? I look at it as a guiding document where states have to implement this, but they may take their own sweet time. There's no kind of accountability. But I would like to talk about the positives first. A few things in the NEP which it is mentioned. even though if states don't implement it, but schools across the country implement it, I feel that it can make a very large impact. And the kind of very basic things, for example, universal access to all levels of schooling, whether from 10 plus 2, they've done 5 plus 3 plus 3 plus 3, and if they've got pre-primary into the entire fold, I think it's extremely necessary for a country like India, because uh, there are primary schools I've seen a primary school in 120 square feet of a room, right? And that's not right, right? It's a separate discussion whether children should be going to school at that age or not, because many countries don't even profess that. But if it is happening, then it definitely, there should be some rules and regulations around it. So I think that's a very good first step, at least from a thought perspective. um, there's this one I absolutely love, because in our institutions we've been following it for many years, is there's no hard separation between arts and sciences, between curricular and extracurricular activities, between vocational and academic streams. I think this is also extremely important, and this is what is going to actually create a very entrepreneurial society, instead of just a rote method learning. Because you need to be, my favorite quote, which I tell everyone, is knowledge can take you from A to B, but imagination can take you anywhere. And if you really see what other countries have, is they have imagination. You create things twice, once in your mind and once in reality. So I think us as Indians, we need to be filing more patents, we need to imagine more, we need to be more creative. And I think this part will actually help us doing that, right? um, the next one is establishing a national mission on foundation literacy and numeracy. I think, again, a very extremely critical point, because if children, and literacy, I don't mean speaking English. Literacy is listening, understanding, the language. It's the entire piece, right? I believe that if at a young age you can actually get the foundational numeracy and literacy right, it actually solves a lot of problems in the future for a child, right? So these are few of the things that I feel is a great guiding document for the entire country. And I'm not going to talk about the problems, etc., because I think we know what the issues are. What the NEP does not do, on a larger sense, which I think Geeta also touched upon a little bit, is they've completely sidelined private schools, which was kind of a disappointment. Why I say that, 50%, 60%, whatever that number is in various states, children going to private schools. What has happened in the country is, I think we are one of the only sectors where we are constantly fighting with our customers. It's that trust deficit is so bad that it has given impetus for a parent to be rude to teachers, or parent to be rude to a management, and management to look at parents in a bad way. And I feel this is a big creation of media, big creation of how the government is handling the entire sector. I don't know why they choose to do that. Yes, I call us the deflection sector. Whenever there's any issue elsewhere, they come and hammer us, and hopefully the focus goes on the schooling sector. Well, you know what, I kind of understand that they all governments do that, but is it good for the country? And it is quite evident even from the NEP document, which really does not talk about private school education, and 50% of your children are going to private schools. So I think I was extremely surprised and a little disappointed that they should have had an entire section on private schools and how we can manage them, how it can be a win-win situation. The government narrative has to go towards bridging that trust deficit between parents and school. That is the only way we can kind of go forward. That's one. Number two, I think even from a teacher standpoint, the NEP does not talk too much about teachers. You see, your school is only as good as your teachers. That's a fact. We have to make this profession more aspirational. We have to make, like Geeta said, the teachers more accountable. But I think aspirational before making it accountable, right? I think there should be a huge PR push again, and it has to be done from the central government side of how do we attract good talent into this sector. As soon as you attract good talent into the sector, the sector will grow in itself. Currently, what happens, the I would not like to say it, but not your top performing candidates come into this sector. It's like the third choice. Teaching is probably one of the last choices a person wants to do, right? Kuch nahi kiya to chalo teaching kar lete. Now it is definitely getting better. There are lots of good people coming into the sector, right? Thirdly, so I'm all about educating the entire country, because I think the third problem that NEP will have is till you don't align the college admission procedure with what actually NEP wants to do, it's useless. And why I say that, if you apply to a college abroad, they're like, we need your projects you've done, what are the extracurricular activities you have. Yes, marks are important, but that's not everything. That's probably 20% of what the student is. In India, okay, 99.99%, you'll probably get into the best college. And it's not a short, mind you, right? They really don't look at anything else. If NEP has to be successful at the core education level, schooling level, it has to start from the top. The colleges have to start saying, okay, buddy, this is not, we don't want marks. Give me your entire profile. What projects have you done? What have you achieved? What are your leadership qualities? And then we are going to assess you on all those and going to take you in, So I feel that this part has also not been kind of addressed in the NEP, right? They're trying to do everything, but this is a very critical aspect. If you don't do this, parents will not care. They will make their child sit and make them get marks. So these are my, kind of broad thoughts of NEP. I hope it's been useful. Thank you.
Great, Anirudh. I'll come back to you with more pointed questions in a bit.
Sure.
Dr. Rao, I want to, come to you next. Essentially, I mean, as a representative of the budget private school segment, right? It's a very unique segment, and certainly one that caters to so many millions of children in this country. Yet it tends to be vilified all of the time, and the regulations do it no favors. As a representative of this sector and somebody who's observed the sector so closely, what are your thoughts both on the regulatory framework as it is, and of course, as a result of COVID, how it changes our thinking on the sector?
So thank you, Mrs. Bhuvan Anand, for your lovely introduction and introduction to this particular panel. Thank you, Ketan, for your wonderful views on NEP, and also Mr. Dr. Shah and all the participants. First, I would like to thank CCS for arranging this conference. I have been into this for the last 40 years, teaching the kids, managing schools. I started, as a career as a teacher, then went on to a leader, then started my own schools, like the startups in a way. In the last 40 years, what I've actually saw, what I've been seeing, when we got our independence, we have actually opted for mixed economy. And that mixed economy, it exists in India everywhere except school education. The school education, based on the late 19th century Societies Act, the Indian school education in the private sector runs today, and no change since then. I am really surprised to see report after report, commission after commission, not mentioning the word quality in its report. It has happened just in this 2019 report. Quality was never a paradigm for the commissions. They just want inclusion. They just want universal education for all, free and compulsory education. They're all good, absolutely good. There's no doubt about it. And schools do operate. Schools do take birth only to actually educate a child. Otherwise, if there is no child, there's no need of a school to be there in a community or in an area. So when we think of regulations, in the last 40 years, what I could see was more and more regulations coming, year after year, state, center, district, local level, regulations and regulations and regulations. And I was checking and introspecting myself whether these regulations have really led to amelioration of standards in schools. Empathetically, I'm very sorry to say that the regulations have not enhanced the quality of schooling for the child. Even at the countryside, what I feel is that regulation, of course, there should be regulation. I'm not against the regulation. There should be safety regulations, security regulations, regulations for child rights, regulations for teacher presence, regulation for teacher qualification, regulation for many things. Regulations will have to be there. Today, when we speak of a child's own regulated study, why can't we think of a school having its own self-regulation, which can be connecting to the regulation of the center or the state, whatever it may be? Because when I run my school, or all the friends who are here, whoever is running the school, we are more worried, more concerned. We are more concerned and worried about our kids and safety, the quality, the reach, and of course, the inclusion of all the stakeholders. We do that. But what actually has been happening, especially in the budget schools, private sector, as you said, 80% of the schools, are budget private schools. They're called startups. 20 years ago, they were called startup. Today also, they're called startups. They work as startup and die as startup. That is a tragedy. And in the private sector, so I just want to ask the government a question. Instead of making the public sector and the private sector as two eyes of the government, why do you make this private sector, something like a kind of a villain, like a thing to the community? Why do you, offer this sector like a villain to the community? I don't understand why. I don't understand why the government has guts to, ask the schools, come on, either you're a budget private school, you go for any quality improvement program in your school, I will incentivize you. I will incentivize you. My government will incentivize you. I want my children in the country, because the children in certain countries, children are taken as the invest a lot of money, not only money, resources, intelligences, and so on and so forth. But in our country, the governments are scared of, talking about private schools. So how to talk about the private schools? You try to put some block to the growth of a private school. And public school system, we are not able to correct or improve. And at the same time, we want to meddle with the private. So what will happen to the kids actually who are learning? Even I was asking myself a question: am I doing justice to my kids? Do my children have particular space, time in the school to actually enjoy schooling? Why should my school become a lackluster schooling experience for my child? Why can't my child go all out creatively, ask questions that his mind actually longs for asking? Why should my child be afraid of anything in the school? Why should my child not feel the school like a laboratory where he can actually have hands-on experience in whatever the area or discipline he actually chooses to learn in a school context? I was actually thinking whether it's a budget. Of course, budget private schools have got scarcity of resources, money, funding. There's no doubt about that. And over that, the governmental interventions, unnecessary interventions. And I say, if you say district education officers, and they come and say, they won't look into your academics. They won't look into your program, core program. What is that the kids are really getting? Are they getting what they are supposed to get in this school? Is the school actually, does the school stand for merit? Merit in teaching, the quality of teaching, the quality of delivery, the quality of research, little bit in a small innovation, if not a bigger research like. So I feel that even most of the budget school correspondents, they are willing to sacrifice their lives. They are willing to learn. They are willing to move forward. But I think there's a lot of discouragement. lot of discouragement, especially from the government. And of course, as Ketan said, it's from our parent side. And I think it's as important as to educate the parents as we're educating our kids. It's important. They can't be away from our mainstream schooling. They have to be an integral part of the entire schooling of the kid. That's very obvious. Well, I've been doing that, and there's no other way to go about it. So I think when it comes to regulation, I feel we should be asked to have self-regulation and norms in place and comply to the regulations given by the government. But to me, the only regulation where the school can really feel is that how can you ensure high quality to each of your child? If that quality is not ensured, is not given to the child, and I think whether you have n number of regulations, regulation after regulation, state after state, and of course the union government, the more number of regulations with no concomitant, what you call reach to the child with that quality, and I'm afraid the regulations will have no purpose and no meaning. This is point number one I just wanted to tell. And as far as the budget private schools are concerned, because of this pandemic, thousands of schools will be on their way out. Thousands of schools will be on their way out.
Dr. Rao,
yeah, please.
I wanted to go into COVID discussion a little bit more, particularly the experiences of schools, but I think I will invite Parth to come in with some introductory comments and come back to you if that's okay.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Done.
Great. I really like your point about, that schools remain in startup mode from start to finish almost, but they would not qualify for the Startup India program, right? They would just not qualify because they are of such and such nature and so on, which is quite a tragedy. Parth, COVID has upended all of our lives in ways that we just did not expect, right? And it certainly won't be the only disruption that we see in days to come. And it's interesting that NEP, of course, was passed in July 1990, right in the sort of starting days of that pandemic. So if we had to do it all over again, what would we do differently? So in particular, I want to sort of invite you to make some remarks on how do you align this vision, right, for the national education policy with uncertainties like COVID, and give us the opportunity to be a lot more nimble as in the school education sector in India. So Parth, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Buna. I think it's a really powerful question to think about, right? What the impact of COVID has been on the education system. I think importantly, in our context, what it says about the education policy. So if you think ideally, you want to have a policy which is very resilient, right? That would work in a normal time as well as in a pandemic time. And therefore, policy resiliency would be one of the key sort of parameters that you want to consider in judging the policy. And I think if you apply that standard to NEP, I think in some places it does come out ahead. It seems that approach which is taken under NEP would be able to deal with this changing times if it is implemented in the way is intended in the policy. Right? And I think that's where I think biggest challenge lies. So there are some very good ideas in the NEP, there is no doubt. And of course, there are few that at least I would disagree with, or I would deprioritize them. I think policy resiliency is a good way of thinking about what's a good policy. And from that point of view, if you think about the key idea which is in the NEP, which is separation of functions or roles, right? So separating service delivery, meaning running of government schools, from policy making, from regulation of government and private schools, right? On an equal footing or equitably, right? And assessing learning standards. Right? So all of those functions actually have been now separated in the NEP. So you don't have a situation where one single Secretary of Education sitting in a state education department would be doing everything. Right? He's going to run government schools. He's going to also make policy for the education system. He's also going to be regulating the private schools. It is also going to perform the adjudication function of dispute between private school and the government policy. Right? So I think in that sense, I think that separation of functions is a great way of checking the resiliency of the policy, because in each area of that function would be able to specialize and be able to prepare itself from dealing with sort of uncommon situations. Right? So I think in that sense, I think NEP idea of separation of functions, I see would stand up quite well, even in pandemic times, if it is implemented well. I think the second idea, which is in the NEP, which I think also works well in terms of resiliency, is the focus on learning outcomes and not so much on inputs. Right? I think Anirudh Khaitan and Dr. Prasad both talked about the fact of how private schools are being treated by the current system. Right? And it's largely because of the focus of the current system is on the inputs. And talking about teacher salaries, the size of the land plot, number of books you have in the library, right? And that takes away the focus from what really matters, which is the learning of the students. Right? And I think NEP does quite a good job. So whether you are teaching in a classroom or an online situation that we are currently in, right? Or some kind of mixed classroom or mixed pedagogy that can be adopted moving forward in the future, right? So you would have to allow that kind of autonomy to schools and principals and teachers to figure out what's best for their children in that particular time or circumstance, right? And then judge them by their performance, right? And I think in that sense, what NEP does is bring the focus to learning outcomes as much as possible and de-emphasize the input, right? And I think by de-emphasizing input, indirectly, they are giving a lot more autonomy to the schools, principals, and teachers, that you do what is right thing to do for your children, for your students, and we are going to judge you by how well you achieve the final goal, and not so much through which process you achieve that goal. Right? So I think that is also a good way of thinking about policy resiliency. Right? So I think on both of those parameters, NEP does stand out quite well. Right? Where NEP, I think, would fail in meeting resiliency parameter or standard would be in terms of funding. Right? So one thing became very clear that we have a very dual citizenship sort of system, where one group of children who go to government schools are all fully funded, not only fully funded, as Geeta quite eloquently talked about in her data, they get more and more funding year after year after year, right? While those children who choose to go to private school somehow are treated very differently, right? For them, there is not any support. There is actually very negative or antagonistic attitude from the system towards those children, right? And you can see that government feels that those who go to government schools are their children, and those who go to private schools somehow are not their children or not their responsibility, right? So I think on that count of having equitable treatment of all children in the country, NEP even now fails. Right? It does not treat both those children who go to government school and those who go to private schools equally, right? Or C is responsibility towards both children. And that, I think, is a very big problem and quite clearly visible now during the pandemic, right? The private schools, only few of them who have the resources are able to reach out to children and provide some kind of learning environment. Many of the private schools are unable to do so, particularly the one that you mentioned, the budget private schools, which are, as it is, very low on resources. Right? So I think that equitable treatment of funding and the formula that you talked about in my introduction, fund students, not schools, I think becomes very relevant in this context. Right? And I think that's one way to make the NEP more sort of pandemic resilient. Right? I would suggest that that's one area that we need to look a little closely. And the second, I think, in terms of the examinations, still focus remains on board exams. Actually, in NEP, as you know, we have introduced even more exams. So before NEP, the emphasis was to move away from exams. We actually removed the class 10 exam for a couple of years in between, right? But now we are going to have exams with grade 3, grade 5, grade 8, grade 10, and grade 12, right? Which I think is again moving us in a very different direction. Now we can understand the impetus or logic behind putting more exams, because that is how government thinks it can hold system to account, right? Without exams, they don't know whether teachers would teach or not, whether students would learn or not. So I think that is a very shortcut approach, which in the long run is not going to deliver value for the students, nor would it be resilient to I think different kind of environment that we want to make policy resilient to. Right. So I think thinking about making that resiliency of policy is a good way of testing NEP. Right. And as you pointed out, I think COVID has given us that opportunity to see which of these ideas in NEP are actually resilient to changing environments, and which of the ideas are not resilient, and which ideas need to be there, which are not there. For example, the equitable funding for government and private school students. Right. I think some of those areas I think are worth thinking in deeply about moving forward to see what kind of good policy environment can be created for high quality learning for 21st century.
Parth, thank you so much. That was terrific and bang within the time. So thank you for that. I'm going to come to sort of each of the panelists with a couple of select questions in terms of your particular experiences, right? So Dr. Rao, since I cut you off, I'm going to start with you. With COVID, we know that there has been a huge challenge faced by budget private schools. We've seen some of the data come out from NISA's own surveys, and we've heard the experiences from the ground. So in light of this, both the COVID experience as well as all of the laws and regulations that are in place, I have two questions for you. The first is, of course, could you share your experiences during the time of COVID so we understand this a little bit more clearly? And the second is, what should change in policy, in law, specifically what lines ought to be deleted or what kinds of things we would specifically ask the government to change if we had the chance to?
Thank you so much, Ivana. Actually, as far as BPS budget private schools in the country are concerned, especially in the state of Telangana, in the last 10 months, what we could experience, that schools could not reach the kids because of the challenges of, digital availability, internet availability, parents not paying the fee, though lessons are done through Zoom. Schools did really struggle a lot, still are struggling to reach out to the kids. Then what's happening is now it has been happening in a very sketchy manner. There is no consistent learning that has been happening in the students who are actually part of the budget school system of learning. The schools themselves actually are not in a position to actually arrange those things. Talk to them and arrange those things. Financially, they're in a very, very precarious position. Not able to pay salaries to the teachers, not able to pay building rents, even electricity bills also. The situation is so pathetic that there's nobody to look into or to inquire as to how the school is going to really start. Even when the school reopens also, the school will have to spend some money for sanitization, for so many other things. The schools are really not ready for that. But schools cannot remain shut for long. Schools will have to reopen. So the budget private schools have got, this twin dilemma, whether to go through online, whether to open or not open, because they don't have resources. Most of them are not paying the fee, and government is not looking forward to the budget private schools. It's definitely a very, very tough game for the schools in the next 3 to 6 months. How they survive, how kids do really reach out to education, I'm not very clear about it. We have been having a lot of meetings, a lot of discussions, a lot of webinars, but people are only talking about problems, the challenges, the issues, but then what is elusive is the solution. But
right.
Nobody knows what's going to happen and how it's going to happen. They're only waiting for some good to happen, but they don't have any resources in their hands. I'm afraid there may be a terrible loss to the children studying in budget private school as far as this academics is concerned. You leave alone socio-emotional learning, you leave alone all those things, but at least cognitive improvement or the domain, the cognitive reach to the child probably may be missing by a big mark. That is a danger that is I'm able to see. So I think if
Now,
yeah.
Can I just press you on that a little bit? Because I think even for our audience, it might be useful. Oftentimes when we talk about budget private schools, I think the reaction tends to be, oh, you're just championing private schools, right? But this isn't about schools. This is about children. Could you give us an idea of what is the impact we're looking at? What happens if all these budget private schools shut down tomorrow, right? COVID or no COVID, what would happen?
If the budget private schools are shut because of COVID or some other extraneous or some other reasons, what will happen until already the entire country's education landscape is dominated by the corporate education bodies. Now, as a net result, one thing is happening now. There is a reverse journey from private school to government schools. It's happening. Even in Telangana, it's happening. Telangana government says about 1 lakh of students have joined from private schools to government schools in the last maybe around a month or so. So there's a reverse migration. That is one thing that is happening. Number two, when the budget private schools are closed in thousands, the corporate schools are going to catch them and take those children. The corporate schools are also going down to the level of a budget private school with regard to fee structure. That is, let me be a little bit 20% more or 30% more. So the children will somehow get education, but the parents definitely will have to pay more money for educating their children in a corporate school, corporate run school, maybe in a mandal area or a village area or in a district area. This is going to be a big challenge.
Thank you, Dr. Rao. Anirudh, do you have any sort of immediate reactions to sort of Dr. Rao's submission, but also from the point of view of the kinds of schools that you are engaged with, but are also seeing, which I think are mid-fee to higher fee schools, catering to a slightly different demographic, if I'm not wrong?
So my sentiments are completely resonating with Dr. Rao. We have been unnecessarily been subjected to unique regulations and unique orders by the state government, and even in our sector, in our medium to high fee schools, so we've also faced extremely harsh reactions from parents. They're asking us to slash fees by 50%, 60%. I mean, it's just not practical. It's parents are saying that, why don't we look at cost and give you the cost of the education, right? Let's go into your each expense and give you the cost. Just to give you perspective, the three most needy items is roti, kapda, makan. Do you go to a restaurant at COVID and say, "Bhai, aapki cost kya hai? Aap wo bataiye, main aapko wahi दूं." It's not practical. Right? It's not practical. You have joined the school looking at the fee structure, right? And once you've joined the school looking at the fee structure, you have accepted that you're going to pay that fee structure, right? Now, COVID is not a situation only for you, it's for all of us, right? So the government also has to be practical, and I think the government has a very big role to play in this. They need to be practical and come out with a policy or regulation which is fair for all, not only looking at us, but even at the parents, right? So my view is exactly the same as Mr. Rao. It's going to be a very, very tough time. There are lots of new high fee schools are also going to shut down because, they've built infrastructure and we've got huge bank loans. We are dipping into our reserves, dipping into our personal bank accounts to currently fund a lot of stuff that is going on. So yeah, it's going to be damn tough. I don't know what's going to happen, but let's see. We're waiting for the good news too, Mr. Rao. When you hear some, please tell us.
Anirudh, what does that good news look like?
Honestly, of course, the vaccine is a music to the ears, right? The good news also is, I think the courts have been very helpful. I think, there have been some, I wouldn't say bad judgments, some judgments which are not favorable, some judgments which have been favorable. So I think on a larger perspective, we are looking towards the next year starting. I feel if schools start on April 1st, which it should, because I think more than 50 countries where the pandemic is far more greater than India, the schools have already restarted. I think by April 1st, we should definitely start schools. There is no two thoughts in my mind about that. If that happens, I feel this problem will subside. schools will come together with parents, find a solution, work it out, and you know, and forget it. But that has to happen. If it continues till July, it's going to be mayhem. I don't know what's going to happen if that happens.
So that one good news you wanted, Bhuvana, just 1 minute.
Please.
You wanted a good news. The Andhra Pradesh government has actually is issuing a 15,000 rupees voucher to every child studying in the school, of course, coming from the lower income group families and all that. So they can study in any school they want.
Yes.
So that is I think that government has led by example, and if other state governments can come forward like this, budget private schools not only survive but also thrive and can extend quality education to the last of the child in this country.
Dr. Rao, I'm so glad you mentioned that. That is also what I was thinking, is how do you provide that way to change this adversarial fighting relationship between parents and schools, bring them all on the same platform, and a stimulus would be a great way to do that. I'm proud to say that CCS had a small role to play in the Andhra Pradesh design of the Andhra Pradesh scheme. So that's something that we've been very proud of. Parth, I want to come to you on that note. So one of the challenges that at least I can glean is that we're still looking at school education as brick and mortar, right? That there is a physical school that children go to, and that's the only way that things can operate or be, because we haven't thought of a reality outside of that. COVID, of course, has challenged that. It gives us the way to break out of that kind of standardization mode. I want to talk to you a little bit about this idea that you and I have discussed in the past, which is democratizing education, right? So creating a lot more variation, a lot more options of both school models that work for children, for parents, across geographies, and so on and so forth. So what kinds of sort of opportunities are there for us to think through this? And second is, what kind of changes in regulation will be needed in order to be able to make that that flexibility possible?
Maybe before I answer that specific question, let me say that Anirudh and Dr. Rao have been quite polite in their assessment of how careless and I think short-sighted the government at the center and the state have been. Right? I know they have to run their schools, so they can't take on the system probably directly. But I think it's just so, I mean, in my mind, so shameful that the kind of attitude the governments have taken towards private schools. Right? I mentioned briefly in terms of second-class citizens and the way they are being treated, the children who go to private schools. Right? I think if you think about it, right, the private industry, there is no hesitation in giving support to private industry. Right? There are also for-profit companies. It's not they are doing charity work, but we are willing to give them cheaper loans. We are willing to give them other supports, right? And that is being touted by economists, politicians, and everyone else around the country and the world as the right thing to do. But for a private school, somehow there is a complete blinker, right? So I think the ideological lens through which the government, and I think largely also our society and the media, sees private schools is really hurting at least half of our children and their future moving forward, right? I think that certainly needs to be challenged directly upfront and forthrightly. That if they did not have such a bias against private schools, right, they would have seen private schools as the first place to intervene and to provide support, right? It's not just supporting jobs for teachers and many people who work in private schools. Of course, that is an important part of the support that could be achieved, right? But also continuing good education for the children so that they will be able to sustain this impact of the pandemic and hopefully come out ahead at the end of it, right? So to my mind, I think it is single most and failure. And I think we can blame it to the ideological blinkers that people wear about private schools, right? If that can be challenged, I think we would do so much better. Not just, I think, for the private schools. As you said, ultimately what matters is the children and their learning, whether they go to private school or a high fee school or a low fee school. At the end of the day, we are all responsible for all children, not for some of them, right? I think that really is the biggest problem, right? Now, I think the question that you raised is an important question. What can we do to open the door, right? And I think becoming more and more important to have those multiple doors or pathways to getting education and therefore being able to go to college later on after schooling. One thing which is there in the NEP, and I'm not sure how well it's going to be implemented, which is the strengthening of the NIOS, the National Institute for Open Schooling. Right? That idea has been there for a long time. I think almost everyone supported the idea earlier. But in the last 10 years or so after RTE, somehow NIOS has been given a sort of very second-class treatment. And of course, as you know, it was supposed to be closed down. Luckily, it hasn't been closed down. And hopefully NEP would do a better job of reviving it and strengthening it. Right? What NIOS lacks, I think, compared to say CBSE and other board exams, is the reputation and credibility of the exam they conduct. Right? If somehow we can build the reputation of the NIOS certification, and which is beginning to be seen as equivalent to other board exams, then I think that would open up the pathway for many, many different kinds of pedagogies and philosophies of education. Right? Actually, after working in the space for so many years, I think my fundamental belief is that one single thing can test whether something is good for children or not in terms of education. Right? That every child is unique, and you need to provide customized, personalized education to their child, right? So that the end result is an equitable outcome. If you provide standardized inputs in a situation where every child is unique, then you are going to come up with a very unequitable outcome at the end, right? And so I think just to focus on quality and equity tells us that what we need to do is to move the system towards more and more personalized, customized education. And kind of policies, kind of practices, kind of autonomy that we need to give to the system to move in that direction is ultimately good for children, is good for learning, and it's also good for the nation. Right? And I think that's my single sort of benchmark I use. Is the system allowing more such choices to open, right? That allows more customized education for the children of India. And the system that provides more of that is, I think, ultimately going to be more successful. And the one that does not, and unfortunately, as we have seen so far, half of the children are not getting any benefit of the public funding, right? No any benefit of the public support to their education. And I think that needs to be challenged first and foremost.
Thank you, Parth, for not mincing words. That's very helpful. I think also, one of the things that's often bothered me, right, that in this public funding, like you said, the distinction that we tend to make, we forget that the parents of children who are going to private schools are also contributing to the public exchequer. They are paying their taxes, and it's only fair that they should be able to ask for those for services in return which don't come to them. Anirudh, I want to come to you, and then we'll, after a couple more questions from me, we'll go to the audience for about 20 minutes or so. Anirudh, one quick question for you, right? Now, say tomorrow you had some kind of a pen with which you would rewrite the regulatory framework, right? And what are the top 3 things that you would recommend to improve the school education experience, most and foremost, of course, for children, parents, and then school operators as well? Suppose NEP, we had to reconsider it. What is a couple of things that we would redo in the law and in the regulation? Because ultimately NEP is an intent document and has no, sort of enforceability, right?
Yeah. I'll start with the school operators because that's kind of where it starts from. I would just increase supply. I would make it easier for private players to come in. We would try different models like charter schools in the US. We would invite players to come and get land auction. For example, let's go more granular, right? Like Delhi. They say Delhi has a problem of admissions. This can be solved in the next 5 years. There is so much land in Delhi available to put up schools. You make it easier to open schools. I can guarantee hundreds of entrepreneurs, well-meaning entrepreneurs will come in. They will put up schools. the cost of education will go down, the quality will go up, because we have seen in our school before, it was, we were sitting pretty. We used to get 10 applications for a seat. Now it's gone down to 4. Why? Because there's so many other schools, and that's great. And therefore, we have to increase our quality. Simple demand and supply. So from a government standpoint, I would just, I don't even know how many policies. I don't have a school in Delhi, but they have an insane amount of, I think, 27 policies or 27 registrations that they have to do to open a school in Delhi. It's quite an inane number. I would make it 1. And I would say, okay, come and open schools in Delhi and let's make Delhi So that's what I do from a policy standpoint. Invite educationists, entrepreneurs, and make it easier to open schools. From the parents' perspective, I think this is a longer term approach that we have to take, right? Where we have to stop the focus on exams. It's ridiculous. Parents have to know and I'll give you a very small example, right? We know that writing should not be taught to kids, or it's not good for kids below 6 or 7 years of age. Now, can you imagine an Indian student being in a school and does not know how to write till 6.5, 7? Those parents will go crazy, and it's not their fault because they don't know better, right? So we need a very large education sort of PR program from the government, because this can only be a government initiative. It cannot be done by a private body, right? Educating parents about what education is. What do we look for in a school? What is the correct way which is the correct way schools to teach children, right? So once parents get educated, they can demand the same, and there won't be much resistance if we want to change something in our school which is actually research oriented and good for the child. There won't be resistance from the parent because then they know it's right? And same goes for the children. And for the child, I think the biggest problem right now is the trust deficit. We are not realizing all these things, how it is affecting the child, the social, emotional health of a child. I don't want to take names. Instances like I have seen children being rude to teachers just because, going to the extent, oh, you just care about fees. So for the child, I think we have to take care of the social emotional health. We have to keep them away from this negativity. They are spending 8 hours a day in the school with their teacher. There has to be a respectful relationship, a loving relationship, and a trusting relationship. And if we are going to damage that, we are in for a big problem. So I think, I don't know if I've answered your question, this thing, but this is what I would look for in all 3, parent, teacher, and for the school operators.
Anirudh, I want to challenge you on this idea that only the government can run that PR exercise, right? Because if we keep waiting for them, then perhaps we will not get the end we're looking for. And maybe FICCI, NISA take up the cudgels and run that campaign. What's a good school campaign, right? Dr. Rao, I have the same question for you. So say tomorrow you had the ability to rewrite the regulatory framework, right? So it works for all the players, for all the stakeholders. What would you do? Sort of your top 3 specific policy changes.
Yeah, thank you so much. Mr. Kaitan put very vital points. I think if it has to be redrafted for posterity, what I would normally, because having had the experience of the last 40 years and having seen the schools function in a heavily regulated atmosphere, what I would, I just want flexibility. Right. I just want to give myself declaration stating that I am accountable for all the actions of in my school. That I am accountable for the safety of the kids, for the rights of the kids, that there is no discrimination in my school, that staff are well trained, and there is a continuous professional development. This apart, what I would like the regulatory framework people to do is that to allow the scope and space for the schools to innovate and renovate their schools through innovation. They have to renovate their schools, not as you said, brick and mortar, but a school per se through innovation. There is no innovation today. I'm not talking about creativity. Creativity is a bigger word. I'm just talking about innovation. So one of my regulatory frameworks will be that I would give space and scope to any school, including the budget private school, to start innovating, and to try to be different in the field, to try to be different to each and every child according to his tastes, styles of learning, according to his own, interests and attitudes and aptitudes. So I just want to have that space from the government. So I will I will tell the government, you please give me that kind of freedom to make or to design education for my children depending on their abilities, capabilities, skills, deficiencies, and gaps. Of course, this is point number one. And also point number two, I just want the government to incentivize the schools who actually take a lead in the country, like in each district. If there are 2 or 3 schools, what you call, no, they are, like a flagship schools, like, actually they send out the message across the district. Each district to have at least 2 or 3 such schools where there is interdisciplinary learning, where there's a project-based learning, where the kids drive learning, own learning, and they have their own self-regulation in place. But when I feel regulation, I feel this is this is the regulation I want. So as far as the also I want the central government in like it's you have got both the central and state governments to actually fund each child studying in a budget private school, to fund every year till the child completes now what you call that plus 2, 11th and 12th also. Now it is 3 to 18, not 5 to 14, but 3 to 18. That funding has to go to every child because the state has to own the child. That concept has to come, not the parents do own the child, but the schools do own the child. But I think it is high time that the center and the state governments respectively own the child. As far as the parents are concerned, what I feel is that the education of the parents will have to start. It's very important thing because they were never educated in this particular type of methodology, etc. They know only one thing: grades, marks, and ranks, and ranks, and ranks, and they have to be educated. Finally, with regard to the management, I'm very sorry to say that we are told to lie. We are told to lie to the government, to the income tax. We are told to lie to the departments. So the schools which are supposed to be the bastions of morality, and they are made to lie, and they appear to be stealing the money. Why? I want to pay the tax. If you collect the tax, I want to pay the tax. I want to be transparent, but you don't allow me to do that. You don't allow me to. What kind of justice is this? I don't understand. So I only feel that the schools will have to be reformed, and they have to be very transparent. They have to be very accountable for their actions, and they have to be accountable for the quality of the education for every single child, be it the public school or the private school.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Rao. Bart, same question to you. You have the wand. Change the framework.
I think most of us know the answer in terms of what needs to be done. I think government also knows that. So I don't think there is any sort of magic in terms of figuring out what needs to be done. Right? But just to sort of put it in concrete terms, I would say that is a system, the ecosystem of education is such that, for example, a Teach for India fellow, a good Teach for India fellow wanted to start a school, right? Would he or she be able to start a school, right? And you want to have an ecosystem where there's a funding available to that person, either through the bank or through private equity, right? And that person should be able to start a school if the person thinks they are able to compete in the marketplace. Right? So you want to create that kind of an ecosystem of regulation, open to sort of financial support, which means being open to for-profit education as well as non-profit, right? So I think remove all those barriers that we have created in the path of education entrepreneurs, because without the entrepreneurs in education, we would not have high quality education, right? There is just no doubt, just like every other sector of the society, needs entrepreneurs of various kinds. And so does education, right? Today, I think we have such a situation where if you want to start one more app to deliver food, you can go to hundreds of VCs to get a funding for that app, right? Or that for startup. So if you're a really great person, great educator, if you want to start a school of your own, even a small school, there is just no place to go unless you are independently wealthy family who can support that kind of a venture, right? So I think it just tells you how perverse the funding system we have created, where any other business can get funding, but education does not get funding required for the new people to enter the space, right? And to bring about innovation that needs to be brought about, right? So I would just create a system where a benchmark would be any Teach for India fellow who wants to start a school should be able to start a school, right? So that's a good way of thinking about what needs to be done in the education, right? I think second is funding. We are responsible for all children, not just those who go to government schools, and therefore funding should follow the child. Wherever child goes, the funding should go. The government can define in terms of whichever parameter they want to use for socioeconomic sort of disadvantage, and say the people who meet these parameters would get, just like in Andhra Pradesh, 15,000 rupees or whatever is possible for every child in that category. The child goes to private school, money follows the child to the private school. The child goes to government school, money follows to the government school, right? I think create level playing field across all schools and not have these separate categories of schools. I think we talk about government and private, but I think as you very well know, there are so many subcategories within the government, right? There are KV schools and Sainik schools and Navodaya Vidyalayas, right? So this kind of stratification is actually far greater in government schools than it is even in private schools, right? And I think we have to abolish this system of second-class citizenship that we have created across our education system. I think therefore, I think funding should follow the child, right? And the third, I think just abolish all kinds of board exams and every other exam that we have, right? Let every school decide how they want to assess their children's performance, how they want to train them, whether they want to use Montessori method or a Waldorf or any other thing they think is appropriate for the children, right? Whether they want to teach in a tribal language of Bolangir district, like local language, not just even the state language. Let all of that freedom be given to the schools and let children be judged by the performance, right? And so I would abolish, I think, board exams altogether and let's have some kind of aptitude test that would assess where the children are compared to their cohorts in any given year, which will make life somewhat simpler for the colleges to decide who to admit in their college, right? But as Anirudh pointed out, it would not be just by the mark sheet. You would have to take into account, like many, of course, colleges do around the world, your portfolio of work that you have done over the 12 years, right? And what other things you bring to the table, and that would qualify you for a college admission. So I think opening up the college admission process, right? Focusing that process on multiple parameters and not just board exam results, right? Would be very important to break through this whole, I think, jam that we are in terms of memorization and rattoing things and not really understanding and learning, right? So I think that can go away with abolishing the board exams and creating some kind of aptitude tests at the end of the schooling. So I think one can easily think about, I think, ways in simplifying the system so that it becomes the dynamic, innovative, entrepreneurial system that we need to meet the challenges of the 21st century.
That's great, Parth. Thank you. And since nobody's giving me the wand, I'm giving it to myself. I have a couple of other ideas that maybe we can throw into the mix, right? Our government has been talking about ease of doing business for the last, since 2014 at least. We need ease of opening and running schools, and we can make it at least as simple as that. And as far as the Teach for India barometer goes, I think it's a great benchmark. Maybe we also don't make it, sort of make it necessary for them to prove that their school is essential at the very minimum, right? If not fancy and if not able to meet all the specs. I think we have about 20 minutes for audience questions, and I know that Swati has curated some questions, so I'm going to get that to you. I think Kalpana Kaushik, would you unmute yourself. I think you have a question. I'd request that you direct your question to one panelist, if that's possible. Kalpana Kaushik. Let me read out her question then. Her question is, there is no scope for creativity, there is a lack of innovation. What do you do to bring back the joy of learning? And perhaps that's best answered by the two sort of school operators that we have, right? So Dr. Rao, do you want to take, since you're, sort of got all this experience behind you, how do we bring back joy to learning, and what can the government do to facilitate that?
So I think that's a very, very important question. Nowadays, the kids are struggling to, identify themselves in the group. Right. Because as Parth said, it's a very standardized education, standardized testing that's happening across the schools. I think that is the most unwelcome thing in a school context. Because if in the school or in the classroom, in the lab, in the sport field, if the child finds freedom to express, freedom to think, freedom to question, freedom to contest, and freedom to debate, and freedom to say that, ma'am, you're wrong here, ma'am, you're not correct here. If the freedom is to that extent, the child may be wrong, that's a different thing. But the child has the audacity, the child has the freedom, the courage to speak what he feels inside. If he doesn't speak what he feels inside, how do you expect innovation to take place? Forget about creativity. So the innovation to take place in a child to think differently is to have and exercise a sort of a freedom in the school, back home, everywhere. And if this is missing in our schools, in our classrooms, very tragically, because it's one-way traffic like teaching, and the kids all will have to fall in line with the teachers' mode of teaching. So we do not actually subscribe to variant pedagogy. If you subscribe to variant pedagogy, definitely each child will come forward with his own critical analysis, with his own thinking, finally with his own element of creativity. And also I will tell you, creativity is often misunderstood. What is creativity? They say that something you do, something you think do differently, that's creativity. I'm afraid it's not. Creativity is something which you do not recall from memory, which you do not use your memory lanes or by lanes at all, which you come out with something where you are very imaginary, where you are very imaginative, you come out with own, not with a thought, but with a perspective, with an expression that is terribly disconnected with your thought process or with your intellect. That's very important. So when you say that if the child can create poetry, or if the child can create, some kind of a painting, even those things are also not high-grade creativity element. That, of course, is a creativity. The child can go even beyond that, like even some adults go. So creativity will come, innovation comes only when, and the condition is that if the child owns his learning, drives his learning, has sense of freedom, and then asks questions that pertain to his own intelligences, to his own capacities or incapacities, and get them addressed and then move on.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Rao. Anirudh, I am going to ask another panelist to ask you a question. Muniba Rizvi,
can I just respond?
Yes, please.
I have just 2 minutes to say on that because it's a topic close to my heart. I think the entire schooling industry needs to undergo training, and me too, in empathy. We have a lot of sympathy in this country, but there's a lack of empathy. And I think if we want to bring back the joy of learning into our schools, social emotional learning should become a part of a school curriculum. Every teacher should undergo training on what is social emotional learning, how to empathize with child, put themselves in their place while teaching them. I think that will also bring back the joy of learning. I just wanted to put that in. Please go ahead, Bhavan.
Of course. Muniba Rizvi. Swati, can you unmute Muniba Rizvi, please?
Thank you very much for allowing me to ask a question. I have to say this was a very enlightening discussion. And thank you to all the panelists. You have put forward very interesting opinions. That's given us a lot to think on. My question was this, I directly deal with some students who study in the government schools, and I watched them have a very difficult time throughout the last 10 months. And I see how much everybody has been pushing for digitizing education, and that this is essentially the panacea for, this is the one solution. This is how we have to go about it. But it's not an affordable solution, at least not yet. Um, but I wanted to know from your points of view to all the panelists, were there other methods that you were thinking of that we could have possibly applied, that we could have possibly worked on to make sure that educational blocks weren't being faced by people who could not afford the digital education, people who couldn't afford mobile phones?
I'm sorry, I didn't get your name, ma'am.
My name is Muniba.
Muniba. All right. Thank you, Muniba, for your question. I think the digital divide is not only in government schools, it's also in budget schools. And not only in budget schools, it's also in premium schools. I would say, and I don't have data associated with it, but I would say only a small percentage of students have really gotten the quality education that they could have from digital means in this COVID era. I do not think, I've tried to rack my brains. I don't think there was any other way but the way the schools have given education in these times. What could have happened is the government being a little, I know I'm not government bashing here, whoever's watching, but they're just opinions. Yeah, but what could have happened, probably the government could have been more supportive to private schools in providing, or even government schools in providing that, hardware or infrastructure or some kind of support in that. It was just left to the country. Just go do it, right? So I think from that standpoint, honestly, not much could have been done. It's a bad year. It's a black swan event. You can't really prepare for it. The good part is that we have seen the power of technology. I think going forward, we should all take a lesson from this and democratize education, get it to each person in the country. Now we know it's possible. We used to always have discussions, is video conferencing possible, is classes on video possible, and these are all dreams, but we have seen the power of technology. I think let's not discuss what could have been done, but let's discuss what can be done. Let's be forward thinking and see what has COVID taught us. So it has taught us we can democratize education. We can get it to we can get the best teacher to every child in India now, in every village. So I would say, let us look forward instead of looking backward. What's done is done. The new year is starting. Let's really take our learnings and do good for the country. This is where I stand.
I think one thing could have been done, right? After it became clear that young children are not really susceptible to COVID, and many countries have kept the schools open. Right? I think India should have thought more seriously about the impact of closing schools, given it's not a new discovery of digital divide today, right? We all know that even before COVID, that this is part of the challenge we have across the country, right? I think my sense is that we have been a little more serious about what's happening to the lives of children, teachers, and schools. I think we would have thought about it, that it is possible to open the schools a bit earlier with some precautions that need to be taken. I think that would require government to support schools full-heartedly, as opposed to treating them as sort of pariah, right? I think some of those sort of blinkers that I talked about earlier, that we have systemic blinkers in the society, I think those are stopping us from thinking more openly about how we could have dealt with this particular problem. I think we should be clear that this hasn't gone away. I think it's not true that somehow the vaccine is all going to be hunky-dory in a few months' time, right? We are still going to be dealing with the pandemic in some form or the other for quite some time to come. I think it's important even today to think seriously about what we could do to bring schools back to normal life. I think that's the first priority government and society should have is towards its children. I think it's important that we provide them the safe and comfortable place to get back to the normal rhythm of their life. I think that certainly could have been done. And I think I agree with Anirudh that, yes, we learn lessons, what is possible. I think we would not have thought of doing school choice conference online, frankly, a year ago. That will certainly not be a even remote possibility, right? But we are all very comfortable doing it today. So yes, we have learned quite a few things, and those would be should be used moving forward. So I agree we need to look forward, but at the same time, I think we need to consider the experience of other countries and see what we can learn from them to bring a normal sort of regular life to our children.
What Andhra government has done, they started schools a couple of months ago, very successfully. Now they're bringing it down to even grade 2, grade 3 also. They've been quite successful. He wasn't bothered about the rumors that you started the school 1 week ago and so many children got, COVID, or so many teachers and all that. Sorry, he has simply ignored and he has gone about and he has been successful. This is point number one. I just want to make a mention. Point number two, this COVID has got some kind of, I think, a positive phenomena. The phenomena being that the teachers, actually they have never learned, this working on computers. In the last 10 months, they could teach lessons through computers, through online. They've learned the tricks of the trade. In the last 20 to 30 years, schools could not do, teachers could not learn. But in this 8 to 10 months, wherever they could take, they were able to take learning to the kids through online. This is point number two. And point number three, when there's a big digital divide, as ma'am said, in the government school especially, I have got cases where there's a passionate teacher, where the teacher feels accountable for his own actions. Those teachers have somehow reached those kids. Somehow they reach the kids. In this country, what is lacking is the will to do certain things. That I'm accountable for my actions. I am accountable for this. I don't want to put onus on the government. Once you start thinking like a soldier, if everyone starts thinking like a soldier, somewhere I think I have a positive hope that there'll be a beautiful turnaround in this country.
It's a really nice positive note. Geeta, you have a question for the panel, please.
Yeah, so my question is really, I raised it in my presentation as well. I would dearly love to know from other experts here what they think, because I really do think that this State School Standards Authority is a very promising idea. At one level, of course, one is concerned that this is the creation of yet another quango, yet another authority, regulatory authority. So one is apt to be a bit fearful, understandably. But on the other hand, it seems quite a promising thing if it really can do the function for which it is envisaged. Namely, to regulate private and public schools, and to remove the conflict of interest that currently exists, and to apply light but tight regulation equally to both sectors. I just wonder what the panel think would be the prerequisites for it to be able to do so, and can there really be equal treatment? I mean, given the history, given the embeddedness and entrenchment and the culture that has developed over many, many, many decades of deference to and subservience to the government authorities, it is a very big culture shift that is proposed, envisaged.
Parth, you want to take a stab at this first?
No, I mean, of course, Geeta has raised, I think, very important question. That yes, in theory, it's a great idea to separate regulator and then assign that role to an independent agency. But once you put that idea into the context of India, both in terms of history, in terms of culture, in terms of the subservience that Geeta talked about to the government authorities that is built into the culture, how would that play out? My sense is that quite often, as we have seen in many other parts of the country or areas, right? For example, Election Commission of India, which until recently was not so independent, even though obviously it had a legal status which has not changed from earlier than to now. but because of the people involved, right? And we can name names of the specific individuals in this particular case of Election Commission of India, right? To be able to have the authority to treat, to be run the elections fairly. It's not yet fully done. I think it's an example of an authority that has taken the mandate which has been given to them in the constitution or under the law, and be able to fulfill that mandate because of the people involved. I think in India, as it is in many other areas, we depend on the individuals who are ultimately going to staff these regulatory bodies and what sort of approach, philosophy, mindset that they bring to the table. Right? I think there is no getting away from that fact that initial years of these new agencies are going to be very dependent on the people who are going to be running it. And therefore, I think it's so important for us as sort of policy professionals to think about how to design these agencies, how to design the selection process of the people who are going to be running these agencies, more systematically and more deeply. I think if we are able to do that well, I think there's more than 50-50 chance that at the end we would end up with a better regulatory authority that will serve the cause of education.
Anirudh, Dr. Rao?
So I think Geeta knows the answer to the question. So, but I'm going to take a stab at it. I think the way to actually make this happen, and we're not talking again going forward, is to have everything data oriented, right? So whatever their way of assessing a school standard, whatever the standards are, it has to be data oriented, and that data has to be connected to funding, at least for the government schools, right? And for private schools, they could have some other kind of methodology of getting it implemented. I'm sure they'll find their way. But for government schools, you do your audit, for a lack of a better word, you get your data and you connect it to the funding to the government school. That is, according to me, one of the most fair ways of ensuring that this authority can implement whatever they want in both private and public. It happens in the US, and it's as effective as it can be, but that would be a starting point for me. That there has to be accountability at the end, which is actually connected to data. I'm a very data-centric person, and that would be my thought.
Thank you. Dr. Rao?
What I think she raised a very, very pertinent question.
Yeah.
And I think since independence, I think the governments have been pampering the parents. They, that's their vote bank. I just don't want to be cynical, but that is their vote bank. You say, for example, you've got 10,000 private schools in Telangana, but the parents are around 66 lakhs. So why will government bother about 10,000 school leaders? They are more bothered about 66 lakh people. That is almost one third of the vote bank. 1/3 of the vote bank. The governments, what they are doing is they are only trying to reach out to the people from the lens of election and electorate. That is one tragedy that we have in this country. This is point number one. Whether you call it government or private, even now, for example, NGP says, of course, SA is there. It will start working. Everything will be there on the paper. But when it comes to execution, I don't think private schools will be given that kind of a treatment at par with the government school. Because the private schools are looked at from a different lens altogether. As Kaitan said, there's a trust deficit to such an extent that it's very difficult. Today, we as private school owners or leaders or educators, we feel a little bit almost like a stigmatized, like a kind of a thing. What is happening in the society, in the media, in the fourth estate? Why do we have to explain that I'm doing this good to the child, to the community? Why should I explain that? It should be understood by the people. You come and see, watch the school, what the activities happening for your kid. So whether you call it new wine in the old bottle or old wine in the new bottle, unless and until there is a paradigm shift in the thinking of the rulers, rulers, things will not improve. I am not cynical, please, but things will not improve on the ground. They may improve on the paper, but on the ground, for the things to be improved, I think it may take longer fight into the national capital, not even the state capital. So the government will have to open its eyes, because the government will have to empower private schools, and the government will have to ask the schools. Now, for example, I have constructed school with about 10 crores of a building. I have invested. Where will I get that money from? Government says you don't have to do, you have to do all this. I cannot have a research lab in my school. I want to spend about 1 crore of rupees on a research lab, whereas I am not permitted to do, because I'm curtailed. I cannot have my fanciful imagination of running a school. I am always curtailed, chained. I'm not a free person. And if I want to earn money, you tax my income. You tax my income. And everything is now through DIAS. Let everything be online payment. Let everything be done. So let me have that kind of freedom to explore what I want to explore, what I want my kids and teachers to explore. So I am conditioned to certain regulations which are inimical to the healthy growth of the organization.
On that slightly pessimistic note, but also a note that we have a lot of work ahead of us if we want to change the regulatory environment. We're about 3 minutes past our session time. So I think we'll have to close this session here. Thank you, Dr. Rao, Anirudh, and Parth, for a great conversation. There's a lot of work ahead of us, and I hope we can all come together to do it. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.